Hey guys, welcome back to another video and happy end of the week to all of you. Well, since I missed last week, we have a lot of catching up to do, and as always, we're going to be looking at the weekly changes in capacity, authority capacity, the amount of MCs. We're going to be looking at volumes, rejection rates, diesel prices, spot versus contract rates, and then we're going to get more specific to see how flatbeds, dry vans, and reefers are doing in the current market. Ready? Let's go! All right, first and foremost, the net changes in trucking authority. So the first thing I want you to see here is that since the beginning of the year, this is the net change in carrier population, right? Since the beginning of the year, there has been not a single week where we saw a positive net change in trucking authorities. And this is really a signal of what is happening in the general freight market. It is extremely difficult to keep afloat. Now, as of last week, last Friday, we saw a decrease of another 190 carriers who left. And this is net. This is including people who came into the industry versus those who went out. The net change, 190 carriers lost last week. Now, if we look at this chart, it shows us freight volumes, general freight volumes in the white, and the blue line, this is the total amount of trucking authorities. Now, since the beginning of the year, we can see that volumes are up 18.8%, even though since the beginning of October or so, we see that the volumes have been decreasing, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, the total amount of trucking authorities is actually negative 4.4% year to date, which means that we saw a decrease of 4.4% in terms of the total amount of MCs. Now, I know a lot of you guys want to know exactly how many trucks are going out of business, how much capacity, let's put a number on it, how much capacity is actually exiting the market. Unfortunately, this is something that is literally impossible to calculate. I mean, it could potentially be possible if you had all the time in the world, but realistically, yeah, it's impossible to know how many trucks. But this chart and the one we saw before gives us a general idea of what is happening. And what is happening is that capacity is having a hard time surviving. Now, as I already said, volumes, right? This is October right here. What in the world is happening with my pen? This is October right here. We see that volumes have started going down, and they only recently, in the past week or so, stabilized, and actually in the past day or so started going up again. Now, this is normal for October. Volumes do tend to go down. But the other thing we have to pay attention to is the tender rejection index, right? Which is the white line. And we can see that since the beginning of October, we are seeing a downward trend when it comes to tender rejections. Currently, we are at 3.52%, which means that out of the total freight volume that we see, only 3.52% is actually getting rejected and sent to the free market or the spot market. Now, this is the same exact chart we just looked at, but this is week over week and how much volumes and rejections changed. And yep, we can confirm that volumes, the blue line, we did actually see a 0.5% increase since last week. Rejection levels, however, saw an almost 6% decrease since last week. All right, time for the spot versus contract rates. And we can see that, unfortunately, as we have been for the past 6 months or so, half a year, we're stuck at the same level. 78 cents is the difference between what contract carriers are earning on average versus spot carriers, meaning that contract carriers are currently earning on average 78 cents per mile more than those spot carriers. All right, diesel prices, the bane of my existence. So here we go. This is since the end of July until right now. Well, we can see that, and I'm sure you have felt it, I have for sure, is that diesel prices over the past week have been going up, although there is there's some relief a little bit, because over the past 2 days, it has made a turnaround and it's going down again. Whether it's going to last, that is something I cannot tell you. But currently diesel prices are on average at $4.54 per gallon. Now, if we look at the diesel map right here, we can see that it's split 50-50 pretty much. 50% of markets saw an increase over the past week in diesel prices, while the other 50 saw a decrease. What is extremely surprising is that the markets that saw an increase are predominantly the Midwest, whereas the decrease markets are the West Coast and the East Coast. Very weird and very surprising. All right, now let's get into specifics, starting with flatbeds. On the spot market, volumes, we can see, this is us, the blue line, we can see that volumes are continuing to go down. They're actually going down for the third consecutive week in a row, and they are following that 5-year pattern. Nothing really surprising here, except for the fact that we're way below that 5-year average, right? But the pattern remains the same. If we look at flatbed spot rates, we can see that they're kind of stable, actually. I mean, there was a small decrease week over week, but again, we're following that 5-year pattern. And if we continue following this 5-year pattern, the rates will continue slowly going down and then kind of jumping up a little bit towards the end of the year. Now, this time around, I want to show you 2 maps by DAT. One is for outbound freight for flatbeds and one is for inbound freight. So starting with outbound freight, this shows us literally how many loads there are compared to how many trucks there are. And the theory is the darker red a market is, the more loads there are compared to capacity. So it's a hot market. Nothing changed here, and it hasn't changed for months now. We can see that the hot markets are the Pacific Northwest as well as the South. Again, as a reminder, this does not tell us about where these lanes go, because going to Oregon, you'll get a fantabulous rate somewhere to either Utah or Idaho or a place like Colorado, Wyoming, basically a dead market. Now let's take a look at the inbound freight for flatbeds. This is where these loads are going, where these carriers are delivering these loads on the flatbeds. And you can see that flatbeds go pretty much everywhere, but places like Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Arizona, California, predominantly these flatbed loads are going to dead markets. You can see that in the South, almost nothing goes here. And this is the problem, right? Because everyone wants to go to the South because this is where the better opportunities are for the flatbed, but not a lot of loads go there, which means that rates are crap going to better areas. All right, next we have reefers, starting with spot volumes. So spot volumes actually saw an increase, which is really, really nice. Not surprising though, because we are following that 5-year pattern, and what we can expect, hopefully, is that we continue following it, which means that we're going to see volumes continue increasing with a slight decrease, towards Thanksgiving or so, and then they will continue increasing towards the end of the year again. So nothing surprising. Here's hoping that the trend continues. Now, in terms of reefer spot rates, we can see that there was an increase week over week last week. It is a little bit surprising because this is a time where, according to the 5-year pattern, we should have seen a decrease with an increase in the following weeks. But hey, I'm not going to complain about it. So yeah, a little increase. And what we can expect is that reefer rates should follow the volume pattern, right? They should also start increasing because we're heading into holiday season. People celebrate by eating. So this is where this pattern comes from. The question is whether we are going to see that pattern repeat this year. I think we will. I think it's going to be a slight relief from what we have been going through. If you have a reefer, I know we have a reefer, but again, this is just a theory. We don't know. We can't predict. So just keep your fingers crossed. All right, now on to the general freight market for reefers. So everything, contract, spot, all of it. So this is a volume map, and we can see for the first time actually in a while, I don't remember the last time this map looked like this, we can see increases in volumes for reefers. Usually this map is gray and red. Now this time we have some blue spots here and there, like Dallas, Texas, Missouri, some places in the Midwest, Southern California. We have even Florida, Maryland, Delaware, Massachusetts, Connecticut. So this is nice. This is the first time I'm seeing volume map where there is an increase, a lot of increases week over week for reefers. Now let's take a look at tender rejections. And for tender rejections, not as good as the volume map, unfortunately. Yes, there were some increases. The most significant one happened in North Carolina, an increase in tender rejections for reefers. There were some increases in the Midwest, maybe in Vermont as well, in the Washington state area. Huge decreases in Idaho, North Dakota, all of Nebraska, Tennessee, Mississippi, and basically some areas in the Plain States, Utah, Colorado, Nogales, Arizona. So the rejection map is not as great, I would say, but the question of the day is this: where do you have to go next week as a reefer operator to grab better opportunities? So here's the map, and as a reminder, what we're trying to do is we are trying to pair areas that have high volume and high rejection rates, because that means that more stuff is going to end up on the spot market. Number one for reefers is Twin Falls, Idaho, rejection rate of 29.46%. Number two, Pendleton, Oregon, which has a rejection of 26.14%. And number three is the Midwest, which ranges between 7 and 27% rejection. Now, something that I noticed right away, I don't know if you guys notice it as well, I can see that the only two areas where the reefers are safer than everywhere else, Midwest and the Pacific Northwest, they shrunk. So the rejection rates are lower, there's not as much volume, but my hope is that as we come into holiday season, we're going to see some expansion of the market. There are going to be more places that are tolerable for reefers relative to everywhere else. So again, keeping our fingers crossed. Finally, we have our DriveIn, starting with the spot market volumes. Well, we can see that volumes did decrease a little bit following that 5-year pattern to the T, way below it though. What we can expect if we continue following this pattern is a small increase in the next few weeks, and then a big increase towards the end of the year with DriveIn volumes. Now next, what is happening with spot rates? Well, spot rates are absolutely pitiful. Currently, the average for a DriveIn is $1.85. You can't see it here, but I will attach these charts down below. $1.85 per mile. This is the average posted rate on the load board. There hasn't been much change week over week, but again, we can expect, if we continue following this 5-year pattern, for rates to start creeping up in the next few weeks and towards the end of the year. Now let's take a look at the general freight market for DriveIn, starting with volumes. And yikes, this is definitely not a map we like to see. It's a ton of red, a sea of red basically, meaning that volumes have kind of dropped all over the place for DriveIns week over week, although there are some areas like Utah, Illinois, Missouri, Mississippi, parts of Louisiana, Florida, Massachusetts, Virginia, and random areas where volumes did increase. What is happening with rejections? Well, rejections for DriveIns are much, much better. We can see that predominantly over the past week, there were increases in rejections for DriveIns everywhere pretty much, except for Montana, the Dakotas, Wyoming, northern states like Minnesota, maybe parts of Wisconsin even, West Virginia, and parts of Ohio. And it looks like, I cannot pronounce this. Is it Amarillo or Amarillo, Texas? Somewhere here, basically, northern Texas. But predominantly blue, which is always a good sign. Rejections increased. I like it. So where do you have to go next week if you have a DriveIn to grab relatively better opportunities? Well, we have Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is at 12% rejection. We have Omaha, Nebraska, which is at 10.15% rejection. Then we have Louisville, Kentucky, which is also at 10.12% rejection. And then in general, the Midwest, which ranges from 9% to 12% rejection. So to summarize, yeah, the market is still in the dumps for sure, but I am personally very curious to see what is going to happen over the next few weeks as we enter into holiday season. Historically speaking, we should see some sort of a bump. Now, personally, do I think this is going to be a huge bump? No, not really, but I think it's going to make things a little bit more manageable. As I said in one of my videos before, October has always been a very difficult month for us, regardless of the general market situation. And this year is no different. But you know what? We got through it every single year, and we plan to continue getting through it in the years to come. Keep kicking some butt, continue being patient in your load negotiations, and most importantly, hang in there. Have a fantastic week, you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.